A whole new season of Sherlock is out, which is delightful. So I was thinking to myself, what's something that I could talk to you guys about that's like Sherlock-ish, but would introduce you to a totally new fandom? Something that's similar and maybe takes place in the same time period, but is a great read in its own right. And that's when it hit me. AJ Raffles. Today's episode is called The Gentleman Thief. I'm Dodger, and on behalf of all of us, welcome to the fandom. So a lot of you have no idea who AJ Raffles is, and that's okay. That's totally fine. It's not super surprising, so allow me to set the stage for you. So the first Sherlock Holmes story, A Study in Scarlet, was published in 1886. It introduced two beloved characters, Sherlock Holmes and John Watson, and began a series of very popular stories about an astute detective. You know, for everybody who's watching that has no idea who Sherlock Holmes is. Along with the success of these stories came a huge wave of people trying to get in on it, so to speak. Right? Suddenly everybody wanted to write mysteries with fascinating detectives. It was like the new thing. Do you guys remember when Harry Potter came out and suddenly every young adult author was writing stories about wizards? Kind of like that. So we had psychic detectives, we had forensic detectives, we even had a lady detective. Goodness gracious. I mean, the 1890s were this perfect rootin' tootin' good time for mystery stories. Meanwhile, during the height of Sherlock Holmes fame, Arthur Conan Doyle's hot sister married a man named E.W. Hornung, who was a pretty big fan of Sherlock. Hornung was also a writer, quite a good one actually, and in 1898 he wrote a story called The Chains of Crime, which introduced two new characters, AJ Raffles and Bunny Manders. Now, AJ and Bunny shared much the same dynamic as Sherlock and Watson, but with one major difference. AJ and Bunny were criminals. Burglars, to be exact. How many of you have read or watched Sherlock Holmes and thought, God, this would be so much better if he was a bad guy? AJ is your dude. Now you might be thinking, whoa, wasn't Doyle like super miffed that his brother-in-law Hornung blatantly ripped off his characters? Fortunately, he was okay with the stories, to a certain extent. Hornung dedicated his entire first collection of stories, The Amateur Cracksman, not a great name, did not age well, to Arthur Conan Doyle. He intended his work to be a form of flattery, and he said as much. He never tried to be deceitful or weird about it, and Doyle's only problem, publicly, was that he fundamentally believed that the main character of a story should not be a villain. See, Hornung, instead of going, I get it, what people want is kooky detectives, he looked at Arthur Conan Doyle's work and he said, no, what people really love is the character dynamic, and they love the suspense. So what if I take those two elements but then flip the formula a little bit? And it was a hit, and honestly, the characters aren't as similar as most people expect. In the story, AJ is a famous cricketer, the sport that Hornung loved more than anything, and he uses it as a ruse to travel all over, meet with members of high society, and then rob them blind. AJ is our Sherlock character. He's quick, and he's smart, and he's everything that Sherlock is mentally, but he's only out for himself. Personality-wise, they are totally different. He's charming and easygoing and plays cricket to relax and, you know, robs people. Meanwhile, Sherlock is always on the side of good, always. But you know, he's depressed about how bored he is, and he has a drug problem, and in the stories, even if he's like trying to break into somebody's house, it's made so explicitly clear that he is doing it to save somebody or to right a wrong somehow. Sherlock's the one you call when you need help, and AJ's the one that you call when you want to grab a Bebo with somebody. Nobody's gonna know what that means. It's the same with Bunny Manders, where Watson is this like tired doctor from the front lines who's come back and is trying to get his life back together. Bunny is a young, kind of hapless, broke, sweet boy who meets with the captain of his school's old cricket team and realizes that the guy's a robber, and winds up being totally cool with it. As for similarities, he does fill the same role that Watson does, where Watson is the narrator for the Sherlock Holmes stories. Bunny is the narrator for the AJ Raffles stories. These dudes, they're not even like really evil. They just like stealing stuff. Jesus. As a fun little side note, people always like to be like, oh my gosh, Sherlock Holmes and John Watson are totally in love. But it's actually been speculated that AJ Raffles and Bunny were purposefully written in a romantic way. Literary minds have pointed to Oscar Wilde and George Ives as being potential inspiration for the character of AJ. Both were known for their easygoing, charming nature, for their prowess on the cricket field, and for their love of handsome gentlemen. So it's believed by some that Hornung was inspired by their relationships with their partners and used that in his writing. And some people are like, yeah, but like, at the time, they would have been keeping that pretty quiet. I mean, Hornung probably didn't even know that they were gay, okay? Which, sure, that could totally be true. I mean, he was like pretty good friends with Oscar Wilde, so I bet he knew, but that could totally be true. I just think that it's a fun little side note in this, the age of shipping. Anyway, both stories, the Sherlock Holmes story and the AJ Raffles story, have two different phases, right? Sherlock has his fall, and AJ has something else that I'm not going to spoil in case you're like, oh my god, I can't wait to read about AJ Raffles after this, right? I'm not going to spoil you on it, but some people maintain that the character development done after that big shift between these two phases was much better handled in the AJ Raffles stories than in the Sherlock Holmes stories. People specifically have applauded Bunny for having much more depth than Watson did. And you guys know how much I love Watson. So in the end, despite this ominous warning from his brother-in-law, and despite the fact that he initially made it as kind of an homage to Sherlock Holmes, he went on to write 3 different collections of stories, all about AJ Raffles, as well as a novel, and they were insanely popular. People loved them, to the point where they even had a big production running in London for a couple of years. Aside from Sherlock Holmes, it was the most popular collection of stories during that period, and other authors even took the time to say that Hornung's writing was particularly good. So if you're riding high on Sherlock content and you're just looking for something new, or maybe you're super into cricket and think that it needs more airtime, give AJ Raffles a try. Seriously, there are some similarities, but overall, it stands really, really strong on its own. Enjoy The Gentleman Thief, my lovelies, and welcome to the fandom. We did it!
0 seconds left. Okay.
Oh,
okay.
shit.
And clear.
Literary minds have pointed to... I was gonna say George Orwell. Literary minds have pointed to oh my god, I almost did it again. Literary minds have pointed to George Orwell. Hey. Hey. Hey, shh. Hey, I'm trying to film shit. I'm trying to be a professional in my field.